So right now, a live look as President Trump arrives in Turkey for the high-stakes NATO Summit in that 747-8, that new Air Force One right there. He's taking a look at it.
You know why? The new plane. We got to make sure the stairs fit. You know, so it's go a little bit higher. It's a lot bigger.
Right.
It's a lot bigger plane. So he's like, wait a second. We got to make sure that gap is okay.
And it's fast because they're early. And at any moment, we'll see him. He'll descend the staircase. The Turkish President Erdogan is expected to meet him there at the bottom. There will be an arrival ceremony, followed by an honor guard review and a bilateral meeting. We will have all those images live for you here on Fox and Friends.
Yeah, it looks like, Brian, they've already rolled out the red carpet for the president, just waiting for him in anticipation that he was going to arrive early.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be interesting because one of the things he says he's going to surprise Erdogan with, it's speculated, by readmitting him to have F-35s, which among the people that don't think he should be getting him is most of NATO, because he has the S-300 Russian defense missile system. And do you want the RF-35 to be able to reverse engineer and be able to show a compatibility with the Russian defense system? They said use our system. Don't use the Russian system. So we'll see if something's going to give there, because among the people that don't want him to do that is Prime Minister Netanyahu, who mentioned that yesterday. Lucas Tomlinson is live in Turkey with the latest. Lucas.
Well, good morning, guys. Just a few minutes ago, President Trump and the American delegation arrived here in Ankara for a two-day NATO summit. It's President Trump's first trip abroad aboard the new Air Force One, a gift from the Qatari royal family. You saw that big American flag popping out of the hatch of the top part of the aircraft. This plane is bigger than the previous Air Force One, about 12 to 15 feet longer, in fact, and didn't have to refuel. Flew all the way from Andrews here to Ankara. You mentioned some of the issues looming over this two-day summit. President Trump expected to allow Turkey back into the F-35 stealth fighter jet program. It is not without controversy, as you mentioned, Brian. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, currently the only country, Israel, that operates the F-35 in the Middle East, does not want to see Erdogan receive these jets. Also, Congress and the White House barred Turkey from being in the F-35 program back in 2019 because Erdogan and Turkey had acquired the modern S-400 Russian air defense system. So perhaps Erdogan will have to give that up to receive the F-35. So we'll just have to see after President Trump meets with Erdogan and holds a press conference tomorrow. Other issues looming over the summit: the future of U.S. forces in Europe, Ukraine, also Iran. Last night, while Iran laid to rest, has this massive 7-day state funeral for the late ayatollah killed by U.S. and Israeli forces on the first day of the war. Iranian forces attacked two commercial ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. One of them was an LNG tanker coming from Qatar, where the largest region of natural gas. It was using the southern Omani route. And, of course, the Iranians have been telling ships to use the northern Iranian route and perhaps instituting its tolls after the 60-day MOU expires. But right now we're awaiting President Trump to disembark from the new Air Force One. You see the Turkish honor guard there in formation at parade rest. It's a large American delegation here arriving with President Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. It's going to be 2 days of meetings. There's going to be a dinner tonight hosted by Turkish President Recep Erdogan with the NATO leaders. And tomorrow, again, there will be a press conference with President Trump alongside Erdogan, guys.
And it's worth noting, you know, the president has a real affinity with President Erdogan. They have a great personal relationship. There were some questions of whether the president would even be at this NATO summit. Obviously, he's had some harsh words for NATO. And the president said he's here solely out of personal respect for the Turkish president. And the Turkish leader, Erdogan, specifically requested that President Trump be here and engage. And he's doing that at his behest.
Yeah, and I think the other person that the president has respect for as well, Lucas, is Mark Rutte, the head of NATO. And I think he understands the president, he understands his thinking, and when there has been a relationship fractured, he's been the middle guy, Lucas, trying to mend these fences. And, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, you know, you got the Italian president right now. The president, they're not on good terms right now.
That's right, Lawrence. You make some great points there. President Trump is here to support Turkey's President Recep Erdogan. Remember, Turkey's a longtime ally of the United States. Turkey was the first nation to deploy troops to Korea at the beginning of the Korean War, when the United States went to the UN and called for countries to send forces. Not many did. It was Turkey, it was the United States, alongside South Korean partners. The F-35 is going to be a major point of discussion. Also, defense spending. President Trump has been very adamant that not enough NATO allies are spending not just their required 2% of their GDP on defense, but President Trump wants to see countries spend 5% of the GDP. And President Trump rolled out his new budget for next year. He's planning, if Congress approves it, to spend $1.5 trillion on defense. That's about 5% of the American economy. Right now, the only nations that are doing that in NATO are in Eastern Europe, many bordering Russia. And President Trump wants to see more of those in the alliance in Western Europe, looking at Spain, France, even the Germans. He wants them to spend much more on defense, and also he wants Europe to take more of a leading role in helping Ukraine. Ukraine will also dominate some of the discussions here, guys.
So what do you think will get done? Right now, as much progress as Ukraine is making, Kyiv is basically undefended. They're that low on Patriots. And Zelensky said, he goes, why is it 4 years later we still have not responded with mass production of Patriots? So your thoughts about them maybe America repurposing some Patriots for Kyiv?
Well, Brian, as you know, Patriots are in short supply these days. It costs about $4 million a copy. We saw some of the success Ukraine was using with counter-drone technology, using drones of its own, using some jamming. Patriots, that's a very tall order. Any country that has them really wants them for themselves, especially in the Persian Gulf after this 40-day war against Iran. So Patriot, that's a big ask for Ukraine. They certainly want the Patriot to knock down incoming ballistic missiles. We saw Kyiv attacked yesterday on the eve of this summer. We saw an attack by Iran on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. So the world remains a very dangerous place. You mentioned President Trump coming here. You'd think he would be pretty exhausted after 250th birthday celebrations, 2 trips to North Dakota, then South Dakota, and then celebrating into the early hours in Washington. But it's very clear this is important for President Trump. There's no doubt he's going to urge NATO allies to spend much more on defense. He wants European nations to take a leading role in defending their continent. Also, a major point of discussion will be the future of U.S. forces. Again, you can't do Operation Epic Fury, Midnight Hammer, without U.S. forces based in Europe. Just so our viewers understand, those forces are not just in Europe to protect Europe. Most of it is because of the United States. You know, that tanker bridge you saw refueling those B-2s, a lot of them launched from Europe. You had Air Force squadrons based out of Germany, out of Italy, Aviano Air Force Base, and SPAGs in Germany. Those F-16s don't fly strike missions over Iran if they don't leave and depart from Europe, and, of course, bases in the Middle East as well, guys.
Right.
Lucas, thank you.
Thanks, Lucas.
And for viewers, if they're just turning in, Air Force One is wheels down in Ankara, Turkey. In any moment, the president will descend the staircase. He's set to meet Erdogan. There will be a greeting ceremony. They will proceed to a surveillance of the honor guard review, I should say, before the bilateral meeting. And, you know, Lawrence, the last time this took place in Turkey, the NATO summit was 2004, so it's been quite some time. All 32 NATO allies are here, and a lot of big conversations from Ukraine to Turkey.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Brian was talking about how the Ukrainians have shown very great spirit. They're striking inside of Moscow now, which has to be commended. But, Kayla, I guess my question for you is, you know, the president has 2 approaches, the carrot and stick approach. And depending on what's happening in the region at the time, how they, you know, negotiate with the president, it depends on what you're going to get, the carrot or the stick. I'm curious from your perspective, with all the trips you've gone with the president and Trump first term, what approach he's going to use this trip.
I think with the European leaders, you're going to see a lot of sticks, particularly those that did not open their bases to allow the U.S. to use them with Operation Epic Fury. But I do think there's an interesting card to play with Turkey. The president has a great relationship with Turkey. As Brian said, it's expected that he's going to allow Turkey back into the F-35 program. But recall, the president said ahead of the Iran deal, I want Turkey to join the Abraham Accords. And what an exchange that would be, because not only would it be a big sign for the Middle East, a relationship between Turkey and Israel, but it would put a lot of pressure on Iran to see a new, growing, budding alliance of these these Middle Eastern countries alongside Israel. Is that Pollyannish, perhaps, because Netanyahu doesn't want to see the F-35 program go down, but it would be quite something.
I think they might be the last country outside Iran to have relations with Israel. I just think they've never been worse. Yeah. And they're the ones who are funding Hamas right now. They're making sure Hamas is armed, which the president's got to use some leverage there to say, hey, guys, knock it off.
Yes.
You can't have it both ways, because they did play a role in getting the hostages out. So why blow it and arm Hamas, causing months and maybe years of unrest? The other thing the president's got to do is, would it be great if Rutte could use some leverage to say to our allies, you better step forward on Iran.
Right.
You know, don't just sit there and say, I hope the president doesn't blow up and get mad at me. Just say, hey, here are the minesweepers.
Do something.
Here are the escort ships. They will be able to come in 3 weeks with this and 4 weeks with that. And then all of a sudden the president goes, okay, I get it now. So we'll start moving up. Maybe we'll bring less of our troops out than originally planned. Because so far Canada is trying to backfill what we're leaving without much success.
To that point, Brian, I think it's such a great point, because if you talk to the president, it looks like, with the exception of allowing us to use the bases, most of what he wanted the Europeans to do was more symbolic in nature. He didn't really want forces on the ground. He realized that we have a power. Like he says, we could have did it ourselves, but he wanted them to at least show that they had our backs on it. Not necessarily, he wasn't requesting for their troops to join us in this battle.
But the escorting would help.
The escorting would help.
Because, you know, our Navy is a little bit, you know, we need about 50 to 70 more ships right now. And we got to be in multiple places, so it would have helped.
And those minesweepers.
Yeah.
It's funny, though. One thing Rutte said to Politico is the U.S. probably could not have done Epic Fury without using Europe as one big platform of power projection. And, Brian, I feel like the president will have a litany of footnotes to be like, you know, Europe was not key to my success. If anything, they were really the axe, you know, it's standing in the way in this operation.
Us.
Yeah.
Let's bring in national security and military analyst Dr. Rebecca Grant. So what do you think is going to happen? We've seen some fire exchanges at NATO. Dr. Grant, your thoughts about what this conference will most likely be like and what it might yield?
Oh, I expect a little bit of fire and brimstone from President Trump for all the reasons you've been talking about. But that said, a couple of the key allies are ready with some big moves. I'm talking, first of all, Poland, who already spends 5%. And their President Narowski has asked for a permanent U.S. armored brigade stationed in Poland. We have rotational troops there now, but a permanent brigade would include U.S. Abrams tanks alongside Poland, right where they need to be on the Eastern Front. And then you add up, Britain's got a defense plan. They've laid it out. They're getting in line. And Germany says they've got to make up for 3 decades of not spending enough, and they've got to do it all in the next couple of years. So I think at least some of these NATO allies are ready with a good answer for President Trump today.
So, Dr. Grant, how much does the domestic politics of these countries calculate in their response to the president during these meetings? Because you got several of these countries where the president is not popular, and they also have a population that is growing that is quite radical, and they seem to be appeasing those crowds.
And I think that's why so many good NATO allies just blew it when it came to Iran. There's been a lot of political theater here, but I'm telling you, in Ankara, they have got to stop and they've got to get in line. And the main reason is for the alliance, but also to deter Putin. These European nations have experienced Russian drone incursions, cyber attacks, and they are scared to death of a resurgent Russia. This is NATO's core purpose. That's what's got to be front and center today.
Dr. Grant, one of the players who is not here but will undoubtedly be weighing on this gathering is Benjamin Netanyahu. And Netanyahu has spoken out against the F-35 program being given back to Turkey. He's said that Turkey has once talked about conquering Jerusalem, the Jewish state not having a place among humanity. He's been very vocal. So how will Netanyahu, those remarks, those thoughts weigh over this NATO gathering?
Well, and a lot of the NATO leaders aren't really any too fond of him. I think some were a little anti-Israeli. President Trump in the U.S., of course, strong allies, obviously, ironclad relationship with Israel. On the F-35, I think it's time to let Turkey back in. They were original partners in the program. At one point, there was going to be F-35 production back in Turkey. And most of our NATO allies, from Finland and Poland on down, have or are getting this jet. It'll be a while. There's a long line at the factory. It's a very popular aircraft. But that aircraft, no two F-35s are the same. It can be modified with software so that allies have certain capabilities, U.S. has other capabilities. And I think Turkey has our F-16s. They got those early, and they got more when they agreed to let Sweden and Finland into the alliance. And I wouldn't mind seeing Turkey back in the F-35 program, but I want them to give up that Russian air defense system they bought.
Yeah, some say that Russian defense system is still in boxes and that Obama was slow in giving them what they wanted. That's why they went with the Russians. So here's the President of the United States now walking off a plane he clearly loves. And after a trip that was obviously much more comfortable than he's used to.
And at the bottom, you'll see greeting him Ambassador Tom Barrack of Syria and Iraq. You'll see Matthew Whitaker, the U.S. ambassador to NATO. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he will be there. And then the man putting this all on, which is the president of Turkey, President Erdogan, will be greeting him. And we are about to, there goes President Erdogan greeting the president of the United States.
Yeah, the president has a great relationship with him. And look at the hand clap right there. Also, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is traveling with the president on this trip as well, from what we know.
So it's interesting because this relationship doesn't just go when the president was president.
Right.
He was building Trump hotels, Trump Tower over in Turkey. So they were dealing on a business level first. And that's where a lot of these leaders, he got to know some Middle Eastern leaders too, prior to him becoming a politician because of stuff he's done in business.
From here, they'll go to the presidential compound, so we'll watch as that takes place. But, Brian, you're absolutely right, a long relationship. And President Erdogan has said one thing that he wants is to be given access to the same security initiatives as other NATO members. Turkey is a NATO member. His slogan has been from Texas to Ankara, Ankara, of course, being in Turkey. He wants access to those programs, and he'll be given them in a pretty extraordinary way with the re-access to that F-35 program.
What makes some people uneasy about Turkey, a lot of things with Erdogan, but number two is how close he is to Vladimir Putin.
Of course.
So that's when you say, hey, you got his missile defense system. Now you want our jets. Got to make a choice. But the one thing Erdogan has done that the president appreciated, he also has good relations with Iran.
Right.
And he told the Iranian leaders, whoever they are, I'm staying out of this.
Right.
And they rocketed Turkey a couple of times. So now they said, and they've said some negative things about the Turkish leader at the Ayatollah's funeral, the never-ending funeral he's on. So they said something negative about Turkey. So he kind of risked that alliance for the president.
Let's listen in to this.
He just stopped briefly. It's hard to hear what he said, but our producers will let us know if they're able to make that out. To your point about Russia, tonight a special dinner invitation extended to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. So those will be some interesting conversations that are had over dinner. As Zelensky, of course, not a member of NATO, but included in these talks in this big moment for these European powers in the United States.
I got to be honest. It just shows you the chemistry between these two. I'm not used to people touching the president. I mean, he's holding on to the president. The president is not as affectionate that way. So to see him allow that, to see this bond, to see how they greeted each other, that just shows you the separation right there. It is going to be interesting going into these meetings because obviously the president is closer to Erdogan than many of the NATO countries.
Erdogan has also been tight with Zelensky, so he could play a valuable role there. What General Jack Keane brought up, but I hope the president goes for, is give the license to make the Patriots to the Ukrainians. They give us 20% of the stock. They're able to mass produce because they're great at it. It's very similar to what Iran did with Russia. They said, this is how you make a Shahed drone. And the Russians are doing it on their own. If we just gave the license ability temporarily to Ukraine, they could build up their own missile defense.
Right. And we've already seen, because of the president's pressure, that the Europeans are buying a lot of these weapons anyway. So it's not going to be like it's going to be a fee on the American taxpayer.
Oh, no, it's a profit.
They've removed that. Yeah.
It's a profit. But the thing is, we're not delivering in time. Taiwan's still waiting for some of their roars. But the President of the United States comes off by himself and with his delegation. will head off and the meetings will begin.
Right.
They will. It is interesting, Lawrence, because I noticed the same thing, the touching.
Right.
They are very close.
Right.
I don't know that there's going to be a lot of that kind of personal affinity between the European leaders and the president, but those relationships matter. They matter as you try to achieve things like, I know it seems unthinkable, but Turkey one day joining the Abraham Accords, it was unthinkable the first time in the first administration when we got 4 Middle Eastern countries to join. Never say never, because these relationships matter, and this is a president who has gotten things done.
Yeah, we didn't think of.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.